I want to deal with today what has become since 2016, that's just 3 years, a major challenge to our ideas of what translation is, in the sense that translation studies has fixed on and looked at the profession of the translator and interpreter and terminologist and subtitler and all the rest. And we've developed in conjunction with that idea of a profession. Our mainstay in the university system is training, because it's been relatively easy to get bums on seats, that is, to get students to come in and study translation. Therefore, we get publication space. Therefore, we've grown enormously since the 1980s on the basis of that relation between academic research, university training, and a profession. So what happens when something does better than the profession? This is a hand-drawn thing I stole from an Australian who works at Stanford. Machine translation, MT, has risen up and down on a roller coaster ride over history, but we are now on one of the big ups, and I think the definitive big up of machine translation. As you can see there, neural machine translation coming on board in 2016, developing prior to that. There are many things before it, but this is what I'm dealing with here. And as has been noted, there are lots of remaining problems. It's not like it's got to perfection and it's stopped, but it's got to a level where it changes the whole game. And that's what I want to show to you today. Now, it was announced 2018. Google Translate. You've heard of Google Translate, I presume. But it's only one. There's Microsoft Translator, there's Yandex for Russian, there's Baidu for Chinese, or many neural machine publicly available neural machine translation systems around. 143 billion words a day. Okay, 143 billion. Now, how many people are in the world? Any ideas? No? Between 7 and 8. Yeah. Let's say 7.5. I mean, that's like 7 words per day per person. All right? Or let me do another calculation. Okay, 143 billion, right? Now, I know, because I worked it out, that there are exactly 333,000 full-time translators and interpreters in the world. Give or take 100,000. Okay, it's a ballpark figure. I also know that 70% or so of the profession is part-time, so there's many more people than that. But let's be generous, take that figure, and let's imagine that they do 3,000 words a day. I'm being very generous, okay? They're working like the clappers and doing 3,000 words a day, and the output is 999 million, or let's say 1 billion for the sake of calculations. What happens when we calculate that in relation to what Google Translate reports doing? Professional translators and interpreters are doing 0.69% of what Google Translate renders, and Google is only one of the systems that are out there. Translation studies, ladies and gentlemen, in its development since the 1990s, is based on 0.69% of what people want to do with translation if they have it for free. This has got to set us thinking about what I mean, fair enough, we can talk about professions, we can train people for a profession, but we can't therefore go out and pretend to know what's happening in translation as a social human activity, or what people want to do with it if it is available. This puts paid to many myths such as, English is taking over, everybody's working in the lingua franca. Not for that much translation. People are working in many, many languages, and mobility is taking them across many, many language borders. Now, what's in that 143 billion words a day? Who knows? I asked my 14-year-old son, because for everything technological, the younger you are, the better you are. And he said, well, all my mates use it for their Italian homework. He does French. He didn't confess that he does it for his French homework as well. I said, well, how, you can't get that many words cheating on your Italian homework, can you? And he said, oh yeah, but we go into websites and you click on the automatic translation. And true, you get the whole website, so that big 143 million doesn't mean 143 million words read. It just means that it's an automatic process that people like to have available to them for one reason or another. That is, you might put the website into a language and just extract 3 words from it. So, the need is not in absolute reception. We could therefore play with that figure and try to get it down to something we could understand. But there is no way that it can make translation studies in its current state relative to what translation is doing in the world. That is relative in any way. We're in a period, ladies and gentlemen, of handbooks or encyclopedias. Most are called handbooks. I've counted 18 that are being done now as we speak. 18 in translation studies. As if we had solid knowledge to put into 18 big solid volumes. And all of that work, that massive set of intellectual reflection and recuperating our development moves into abject irrelevance compared with what's happening in machine translation. If you want to talk about sustainability going forward, and that's, I think, our topic, this is what you have to come to terms with. Here's an example of where we've come from. I'm sorry, I've used this in a previous talk on the same topic, and it was in Switzerland, and this was the introduction to the conference, which was on machine translation. So this is what machine translation would have looked. If you don't understand German, this is for you, because that's German over there. And this is what Sistran transfer system did with that German. It is, of course, in the future to talk to that be translated simultaneously from your mobile phone. All right. So 1990s, that was machine translation. Not a happy time. That was the time you would look at it, get a few suggestions, close it, and just do your human translation. Okay? What's its problem here? The problem is actually this word, selbstverständlich, which it's rendered as an adverbial, of course, but it could also be an adjective. It couldn't pass the word, we couldn't categorize it as an adverbial or an adjective, and got it wrong, and therefore the whole sentence is messed up. Okay? And this was very frequent with any text of any complexity, especially syntactic complexity. This is neural. Will it be natural in the future to have conversations that are simultaneously translated by the mobile phone? We could cap at we could remove it or put mobile phones. We could always improve the text. But hey, we can work with that. We can understand what's going on. Not perfect. If it were your splash page for your company and it's your company image, yes, we would go through and do some post-editing and perhaps remove this wonderful calc from German, language cultural, which isn't bad as a neologistic adjective compound, but we could touch that one up too if we liked, okay? But fairly minimal, okay? And that's where we've come from that in the middle to that on the right. The systems that we have help us learn, or help my son and his friends learn when they're studying their languages. If you're worried about that word selbstverständlich, Google gives you the versions, and you see it could be an adverb or an adjective. So you could use that information to go back and correct the version that's not making sense. That's Google. This is DeepL. If you don't play with the DeepL, go and have some fun, ladies and gentlemen. What DeepL does, this is the same sentence, right? It proposed self-evident, which sounds a little weird. Click on self-evident and you get all these alternative translations. Select the one that seems to fit, click on it, and the rest of the translation is adjusted if there are questions of gender or concordance or anything like that. So you've got a form of interactive post-editing until you get the text that makes sense for you. in the target language. Many people can do this quite happily without knowing the start language. There's a certain risk attached to it, but if people know the area very well, they're fine. I work with specialists over the years, especially in Tarragona, where they have a huge chemistry department, and we have to revise their papers, which they write in English or put it through this machine in English. I have no idea about the terminology, but they know all of that. My post-editing is syntax. We make the syntax sound good. They know all the terms, and this helps us with the terms if we're stuck. Now, I have modified this talk. Louisa, was it yesterday or 2 days ago, was telling us that machine translation is basically sexist. Fair enough, but it's not the machine. I want to say, hey, no. Okay, it's true. I tried it. This is DeepL. The nurse told the doctor what to do. I thought I would give the nurse some power. Let's to see. Okay, DeepL. Okay, la enfermera. I'm going to Spanish, but it was the same for Italian. The nurse becomes feminine and the doctor is masculine. Sexist bastard. Okay. But you don't like it and you want to make the nurse a man, click on it. And I've got el enfermero. Why not? Okay, and if I'm worried about that, I can go el personal. Okay, or le dijo. I can get rid of it. So it gives us the means to modify the language if you want. If you don't like sexist language, use this and change it. But to complain about machine translation being sexist is like Donald Trump complaining about the polls. You know, the polls are wrong. If it doesn't show me ahead, this is just going through what's in the database. And I'm sorry, if you live in patriarchy, your database is full of sexist language, and picking out the most probable based on the statistics of use in the associated field. Okay? Don't blame the polls. Change the language, and this gives you the means to change the language. True, it would be conceivable that we could put in an algorithm that makes all nurses masculine and all doctors feminine by default, if you want. Okay? But the social use of that particular algorithm may not be exactly what we want. It's easy to make fun of machine translation. This is from YouTube, a whole series of songs called Google Translate Sings. So the girl there gets the lyrics to a song and puts it through Google Translate, but she has to go forward and backwards many times to amplify the errors, okay? And then she sings the song with all the errors that Google Translate makes. Now, is this going to work? High risk.
Check your clothes locked. I want to let's sign a labyrinth wall and make the plaintiff's regime.
It's a super, growing. And Despacito is quickly. Who knows why Despacito is slow, right?
Sign a labyrinth wall and make the plaintiff's regime.
Okay, and it's rather funny because it makes no sense whatsoever, and we can have a good laugh at machine translation. But I put through Despacito. I hope you know the song. I was going to sing a bit of it, but she did it for me, so I don't have to, do I? Okay. Through Babelfish 2014, slowly I want to undress to kissing slowly. Signed on the walls of your maze and make your body throughout. It's not too bad, you know. It's rather poetic. But you could do better with Google Translate. I want to kiss you slowly, sign on the walls of your labyrinth and make your whole body a manuscript. It might get you further. All right?
Right.
So despite the comic effect that we can find in machine translation, the advance is palpable and doesn't merit derision. It gets better though, ladies and gentlemen. The DeepL, Despacito, is slowly, that's its normal translation if I put it in as a word. But if I put in Despacito, quiero respirar tu cuello despacito, which is the song, what happens? Despacito becomes nice and easy. Why? Because you can sing it. Nice and easy, dot, dot, dot. Yeah? So what it's done, and this is the trick, Neural does not translate. It goes and finds in its database a previous translation. So if I put in this string here, quiero respirar tu cuello, which does mean that I want to breathe your neck slowly, it sounds horrible, like cannibalism, but anyway, it's okay. If I put that in, it goes through the database and finds the translation that corresponds with that string and brings that up. So what it's done, it's located an English translation of that song, which has to scan in order for the singing. It makes despacito into nice and easy and brings that up. It's like a dating service, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? It's not inventing your perfect mate. It's going through the database to find candidates for you. Okay, the analogy is a little stretched, but it's not translating. It's finding previous human translations. And that's the big step forward. Okay? I've lost another example there. Okay, I'll come back to another example of that. Now, the advance achieves one of the goals that Obama set out when he was elected in 2018, became president in 2008 and 9. Okay, he had strategies for American innovation, and one of the aims was this: automatic, highly accurate, and real-time translation, greatly lowering the barriers to international commerce and collaboration. We could carp and say, oh, he's seeing languages as a problem rather than as a boon, but this was the aim. This was in the age of statistical machine translation, which did hold out that promise, but it didn't realize that promise, basically because people are stupid. What happened was that statistical machine translation, which was just going through the database, would use probability statistics to bring up a candidate translation, but people then believed that that was a good translation, put it on websites as a parallel text. The crawler goes through the web, picks up the website translations, feeds them back into the database. So if you're producing error, it's error out, error in, error out, error in, and you got this compound effect so that in some language pairs there was no effective progress on the level of linguistic quality, which was worrying, because the promise was that if you have something good coming out, then that's put on the web and it's fed back in, it gets better, and the better the quality of the machine translation, the more people will use it, and the more people use it, the better the quality. And it was supposed to be this virtuous circle that on the basis of pure statistics would send us up to the higher levels of the Tower of Babel, that is up to heaven, or paradise for translation theorists. It never got there. The problem was not in the machines, it was in the stupid people who don't know how to use the machines, or who believe that is the translation and feed it back in. Okay. For example, and this is a worrying example, you remember Obama and his slogan, "Yes, we can," which I put in Google there, "Si podemos." I've been using this example for years and they haven't corrected it. "Si podemos," is that right, Esther, Spanish people? Of course. But put "si podemos" back in and feed it back the other way, and it comes out as "if we can." Okay, it's still there. The errors are still in there. Okay, what's the problem? They don't put that accent on the C to make it a yes. But, okay, it's fallible. It's still fallible, despite the wonderful things that we've just seen. So let me go through some of the myths. Humans will always translate better than a machine. Probably so. But machines don't translate. They find the human translation. All the translations you got in there are of human origins. Basic theory of linguistic capital. Myth 2. The bigger the database, the better the MT. This was the promise of statistical machine translation. No, MT needs clean data, not better data. And that's what we're finding in many fields of activity. At the time of statisticals, machine translation when it looked like just building up big databases would lead us to paradise. Some of the big language service providers got together and proposed a thing called the Human Language Project. Calqued on the Human Gene Project. Do you remember that one? Where medical scientists all over the world got together and mapped human DNA, this huge collaborative project over the world. The idea was that we have data on languages, and if we share the data, we could map the languages adequately well to have good quality machine translation between all the languages in the world. At the moment, it depends on the databases, therefore the electronic resources. Many languages don't have big electronic resources and are not in the sphere of machine translation. The companies themselves put together this project to collaborate and do good work for humanity. However, it then turned out that quality depends on good, clean databases with no errors in them. These are databases of bitexts, okay, with the STTT being matched together, and that what the companies were therefore selling as their stock in trade was the quality of the databases. That's what they were going to get rich on. So, hey guys, we're not going to share it after all. And that project got nowhere. We are back to linguistic capitalism in that sense. Myth number 3, and this one has been out there for some time. Machine translation has reached parity with humans. And this cite from Hassan et al. There are 2 papers out there in 2017, 2018, one by Google, another by Microsoft. Both claim parity with human translation on the basis of assessing outputs. Okay? So the Hassan one, 18 million bilingual sentence pairs are evaluated by bilingual crowd workers. Don't know who the hell they are, but... And they were asked whether the candidate translation conveyed the semantics of the source text. So it's being based on, does it say the same thing, not on, is it linguistically well formed? Okay, so the question is set up there. And they're looking at isolated sentences as well. Okay, and so on that basis, it was found that the readers statistically could not tell which ones were done by MT, which is a form of parity. Okay, it's a sort of non-result. Statistically, you say they have no result, but it's a headline thing. It does make the news. Okay, problems with that are fairly obvious. We're not looking at syntactic well-formedness, and that is important for a great number of uses. And most readers or users of language do not just work on isolated sentences. We work on texts of some length. My point as well, to go back to what Mirella was saying, I'm interested in risk analysis. I'll give you just an illustration so you can see what I'm getting at. Humans are fallible, as Pilar said yesterday. Don't trust a human. You know, think of your students. They're humans, right? Okay. And we correct them, right? Okay. Let's say a page of translation. This is done by MT, this is done by my students. There are 3 errors in each page, which is quite possible. They can be minor errors. That's the trick. For the human translator, we learn instinctively to check in the key portions of the text. A lot of the text is low risk, some bits are high risk. Like if you get it wrong there, the whole communication act fails. But if you get a few little adjectives wrong or mess up the order or there's some typos, it gets through. The communication act will stand up. Now, for the human, instinctively, we know to check the high-risk sections. At least after you've had a few classes by me, I hope. Okay? Beginners don't. Beginners think everything's important. That's why they go really slowly. Despacito. And over here, the machine, however, has got string. They just see sentences. They cannot invest more effort in the high-risk areas. So we would bet, and I've done some experiments that show this does happen, that the errors in the machine translation could be in the high-risk areas. the errors in the human translation will tend not to be. Okay? Do you get the idea? So this is how it's possible that even if humans are as fallible as MT, as this research is suggesting, the translations will serve communicative purposes better, simply because we're able to see more of the context and the people involved. Okay, so this is Singularity. The argument is that human intellect grows over time slowly. I don't know if it does, but let's suppose. But that computer processing capacity increases exponentially. Okay? And so there will become a time when the computer processing capacity is greater than that of the human brain. This is a logical certainty, I think. Okay? The papers on this sort of put that point further and further in the future, but it was supposed to happen probably 2 years. I think 2015 was what Kurzweil first predicted, and then sort of goes. That's the singularity. This is the magic moment when the machine thinks faster than the human brain. The problem with that is, yes, the machine can have this processing capacity, okay? But we are judging the quality of communication, not processing capacity. They can do those calculations to find a highly probable rendition for that particular ST, but they cannot build into those calculations the human situation in which we are acting. Capacity is not product. So I'm not too worried about singularity. MT is all or nothing. We still have around a lot of people in translation studies who live in absolute denial of what's happening. This has been on the Québécois Translator Association for many years. It will be some time before these kinds of tools are capable of producing quality translation. I mean, they don't want to look at what's happening with the tools and at where they are now. And then we recommend prudence. Prudence is always a good recommendation. And you call on a certified translator for all your translation needs. This means it's an all or nothing thing. It's no longer an all or nothing. Go with MT or go with human. Everyone I know these days puts the text through MT and post-edits. I do post-editing. Often you put it through and you get rubbish, you wipe it away, and I translate from scratch, but it depends on the quality of the output. And sometimes I do quite heavy post-editing, and often we can get by with quite light post-editing. This all or nothing approach to machine translation is simply living with your head in the sand. The ATA, the American Translators Association, is now recognizing post-edited machine translation is a way translators are working, and they are adjusting their certification exams to fit, as is NATI in Australia. That is, we are starting, these big associations, NATI's fairly big within Australia, are starting to see and recognize that there is a new way of working and that the profession has to take it on board. This is the big one now. MT spells out the end of the profession. And I've been criticized. I think Dorothy Kenny wrote a paper. She takes me to task for this sentence. I did write, I confess, back in the day, before Neural, statistical-based machine translation, along with its many hybrids, is destined to turn most translators into post-editors one day, perhaps soon. And the critique here is that post-editing is pretty boring donkey work. I did ask, I think, Pilar yesterday, what about the quality of the worker, of the jobs that we're getting? And, going through segmented text, spot the mistake and correct that one and go on to the next. it's not really humanly satisfying work, I think. And I was criticized as actually proposing training solutions for this outlook. Happily, that guy Pym also wrote, way back in 1998, translators do more than translate. And I think that's the answer. And I think Dorothy was going that way with her critique of me, saying, no, the solution is not to turn us into post-editors, it's to do more than translate. And I think she was quite right in her criticism of that particular paper, where I was putting forward a program for training people in the use of machine translation, and more attention should be paid to this one, to translators do more than translate. To give you an idea, I think in 2016 I did a book on solution types. You don't have to read it because this is the sum result of that entire book. Okay, I summarize it into these simple types of solutions that translators come up with. It's a Vine-Dabelne map, if you like, from close to the text, copying, right down to changing the text tailoring. Now, machine translation will not give, usually, the copying. They will believe they have to translate everything. So over-translation tends to be part of what machines fall into, and they tend not to give the corresponding idioms, although the Despacito example is wonderful, or text tailoring, which means adding things in and leaving things out in the content of the text. That would be rewriting, or if you're doing German, Michael Schreiber had Textbearbeitung, okay, which I think is very much of what translators should do. But machine translation is sort of in the middle there, using straight literal rendition and perspective change, density change. You can do that, but will not play on the extremes of what translators can do. I have to check this because I put our summer school text from the website through DeepL and into Italian. Yeah, you've got it in English, so I put it through. It came out in Italian, and it was La Summer School, which I thought was really good. So they did use copying words. Into Spanish it went Escuela de Verano, German Sommerschule, but into Italian, Summer School. I thought, wow, it's learning not to translate. That's really advanced. Yes. Okay, so I might have to revise this map. Okay, but my thinking is that for high quality, high risk translation, we want people who can play with the full orchestra of solutions available to them. And machine translation will not. We do have that advantage of playing at the ends of what textual work can be. To go back to Christiane Nord's model of what translation is, you've got communication, it can be cross-cultural, it can be mediated, and that's the category of translatorial action. And under that, translators can either produce a translation from a start text or do non-translational work. So the idea of translators doing more than translate has been with us at least since 1997, when Christiane Nord published this book, of which I edited every single sentence, I might point out. Anyway, okay. So it's been there for a long time. We just haven't paid a whole lot of attention to what is there. At the time, we were talking about drafting. Client comes on in with a text, translator looks at it and says, I'm sorry, it's not going to work. They're never going to believe this sort of stuff. Let me write a text for you. Drafting, rewriting, okay. Terminological work, consultation about communication or how to adapt the text to the new cultural situation or the new purpose. This was wholly within Skopos theory. We had it here. They've now changed their name several times since 2010, but this is a workflow diagram of how a text could be dealt with professionally by a language service provider. It's a maximalist model. So it comes in, it's segmented to go through the technologies. You get a glossary coming in, and then it's machine translated and goes out to the crowd, so we get non-professional or unpaid area experts who are interested in it. This might be, for example, a Greenpeace text, a Greenpeace website. So lots of people will do that for free, and they'll know a lot about biology and ecosystems in their particular fields. Okay. After that, it comes to the professional translator for revision of the MT and the input coming from area experts. Then there are people who do the style correction, if it's for a high-end website. Okay. That's reviewed, and then it's all put back together with the images. So the work that's being created is in running the technology and running the project. It's certainly in checking the translation. It's certainly in stylistic correction, and very much in the reviewing process. Okay, and a lot of the work of translators in this model is shifting from first-level translation to various degrees of checking, reviewing, revising. Another way of looking at it, this is from an article by Wei in 2018, but I've taken it from a lecture given by Li Defeng in Barcelona last year. And this was the prediction of the future. He says, we are here now where you've got professional translators, top translators, and some stuff being done by machine translation. The prediction is that machine translation will grow. Machine-aided translation, which is post-editing, will be there, and that the top-level translators, which in China means the people who are working for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on what they call the international discourse system, which is very, very highly controlled and coordinated across all languages, those people will remain the same, fully human people we can trust. To give you an idea, I'll be talking about this, I think, tomorrow, but in China, they attach so much attention to the promotion of their cultural texts and cultural policy that they have officially recognized translators who've done their MTI programs, but for the really sensitive texts, they have created a position, a doctorate translator. A translator become a doctor. It doesn't mean they do a thesis, it just means they are very, very, very good translators, like the ones we really trust with our highly sensitive texts, okay? And they are fully human at the top. I'm interested in that model because I wanted to draw it again. I think that it's supposing that machine translation will occupy the space of what's done by professional translators. But I think it's fairly clear that a lot of that machine translation is doing stuff that was never going to be sent to professional translators anyway. Okay, it's stuff that people are doing because it's there to be done for nothing. But if they had to pay for somebody to do it, they wouldn't pay them. And so I redrew that triangle, and now I should redraw it so that this little bit up here is 0.68% of all that down there. Okay, we are working on that little bit. So some parts of the translation market are not changing, other parts are. And then there's this whole social activity that is operating in spaces quite different from us. So MT is used in at least all these places. I will put down at the bottom security surveillance, which is very much the case in many of our countries. Okay, and this is at the top end of the things, industry export, it's creating some added value. And here, this is an issue of language problems, language planning. It's not a translation studies journal. I've been trying to get out of translation studies for many years. They won't let me. I mean, it's really hard to enter another discipline when you know. Anyway, this is on mediation strategies. We did case studies of different communities. Two of them were asylum seekers. One group in Leipzig, the other in Ljubljana. And the others were international adoption in Italy and a Russian-speaking community in Spain. And we did surveys of how they solved their language problems as in the context of mobility. And we were looking at the use of machine translation, the use of professional interpreters and translators. We were looking at the use of lingua franca, English, but not just English. Spanish is a lingua franca, so can German be in some situations. And we were looking at what's called intercomprehension, which are bilingual conversations. If I'm in Italy here, I can really speak Spanish, they answer in Italian, we'll understand each other well enough for most purposes. That would be intercomprehension, okay? So what we found was that all solutions are used in all situations. There's a presence of all of them, sometimes big, sometimes minimal. The surprising thing was that the use of machine translation was constantly there as a checking on the other means. For example, for the visit to the doctor, they would check their symptoms on machine translation before going. Let's say, for example, in Leipzig, they would check the German terms for what they think they've got, go in, get the advice from the doctor, and then check that afterwards as well, okay? Which also meant they weren't really trusting the doctor, okay? But they would check everything and use it as a learning tool for that important situation, visit to the doctor. And then the actual interview with the doctor could frequently mix English and German because English was present as a lingua franca and they were learning German. But it certainly had a main role there as a check on the other means. And the surprising thing was, time and time again, people didn't want professional interpreters there. They don't want the professionals because it's a human mediation situation and they don't trust the human. Okay, there can be many reasons. Many of these people are coming from Syria, Afghanistan, and places where if you work for the government, you report to the government and you apply government policy. So if an interpreter comes in and they're paid by the German government, you see them as a spy, who's somebody get information to send you back and not accept you as a refugee or an asylum seeker. So the interpreters were, A, mistrusted, but secondly, they didn't want to give their personal information to that person. They appreciated, these are the people in the so-called detention centers, they appreciated what the machine translation gave them, which was control over the situation, rather than having to trust this unknown person. They were saying what Pilar said yesterday, don't give me a human, give me a machine. At least I know what the machine's doing, I think. Okay. So this was a real kick in the ass for us, because we came in wanting to show how more fully trained interpreters are needed in order to save the world. Yes. And the data says, the world doesn't want to be saved by you. The world is saving itself using technology. Well, the world. In a risk society, such as the societies we live in, which is conditioned by complexity to the effect that we cannot grasp direct relations between cause and effect, there is a breakdown of trust. People tend not to trust the systems that we live in. We no longer entirely trust, well, banks I don't trust at all. Scientists, I know too many of them. Electricity companies, oh God, I don't trust the invoice I get from the electricity company. Doctors, I do check on my doctor. 20 years ago, I might have believed everything she said. Don't anymore. And translators. That is, in a slightly less complex world, people would trust professionals because they were professionals. I don't know if Andrea did this with you, but this is thin trust. I trust you because of your degree or your diploma or your training or your experience. I don't trust you because I know you as a person. I trust this thin trust. That trust is breaking down. And as it breaks down, people want more control over what's happening, and that means there's a move towards the use of machine translation. Does it mean it's the end for human translators? Well, all the data suggests not quite yet. Okay? Here I'm taking stuff from a Bloomsbury Companion to Language Industry Studies, which will appear next year. Okay, so I'm stealing some of their information and actually updating it since things move that fast. So, contrary to belief, if what I was saying were true, we would get fewer and fewer language companies or language service providers. Not so. It's growing quite radically. For example, in the United Kingdom, we get every year more language service providers being created. This is from the United States Occupational Outlook Handbook, and I got it last night, so it's up to date. The prediction for the period from 2016 to 26 is of growth at 18%, which is much faster than the average growth in professions. So the demand for translators is still there and is still growing. There is no cause for doomsday predictions about the end of the human translator. We still have our place. The trick is knowing what that place is, okay? As I said, it's in post-editing, revising, checking, where what we are selling is trustworthiness. You know, those 3 mistakes in the machine translation and the 3 mistakes in the human translation. But trust me, if there are 3 mistakes, they're not important. This is going to work for you. And we sell our trustworthiness. I suggest it's not sufficient to do it on the basis of our degrees. But as humans, we need that human contact with the client, with the user, to manifest our position as much as possible, so that we can produce a text that is likely to be trusted. There's also work in pre-editing, in preparing text to go through machine translation easily. That's technical writing, if you like, reviewing, project management, terminology, database management, all these things, okay? That's close to MT. MT creates these kinds of jobs. But neural machine translation is pushing us towards new kinds of employment, which is where we have to pay attention. So that Bloomsbury volume I just cited has a wonderful range of new terms for new jobs, which you might have come across if you're working anywhere near these fields. Journalation, I don't really like that one, but anyway, translation and journalism. You are translating as you create new news stories. And this is what's been happening forever. But we're starting to see that now as part of what translators can do, or journalists do with translation skills. We join that profession. Trans-editing has been around for a long time. Wonderful studies. One of the first studies in that was on the Harlequin series of romance novels. This was by Hemmings Virten in Sweden. It was her doctoral thesis. And it was just amazing to see how these, do you know what I'm talking about? These romance novels of girl falls in love with the lovely doctor. He's always a man. Anyway, they're radically edited for different cultures in terms of length. Oh, we need another chapter here. Certainly in terms of what kind of sex goes on. You know, whole bits are radically, it's codified. You know, here you can touch, here you can look, here you can't, whatever. Trans-editing has been around for a long time. One of the early ones was also on Reader's Digest by Clem Robbins, who's looking at the way that is radically tailored to specific markets, not just translated, but they translate with a big pair of scissors. Transcreation, transadaptation, these are all terms and things that we're doing. The general idea is that it's not enough to translate. We can now translate and do many other things at the same time, especially in public relations. Aline Ramayal, working in subtitling and audiovisual, insists very much on, sorry about the spelling mistake, that translators are now becoming figures who do accessibility management. We are managing who has easy access to this cultural material. Slater produces lots of interesting pieces of data on this. So this is a report, 2018. They identified, going through translation buyers and what the advertisers were there, over 600 unique titles for jobs in the language industry. 600 job description titles of things people with languages, with multilingual skills can do. So if there is a message from machine translation, from neural machine translation, something that you could do research on, the message is this. Number one, don't do it on neural machine translation, because by the time you finish your doctoral thesis, it will have changed. Okay, it's just such a fast-changing market that it's not stable enough for proper empirical study. We can do journalism on it, if you like, intellectual journalism of the kind I'm doing now. But there's a whole lot to be discovered in these areas where translation competence, skills in different languages and coordinating those skills are being used in other professions, in neighboring professions, with creative and satisfying work for us all. And on that optimistic note, I thank you for your attention.